Dear audience, I am very honored and proud being able to introduce for you Mr. Erich Von Däniken, the world's first and most known and famous UFO researcher of this century. He has written 25 books, which has been translated into 28 languages, and he has sold 58 million copies of the books worldwide. From his books, 2 fully-length documentary films have been produced. In fact, Chariots of the Gods and Messages of the Gods. On more than 3,000 lectures, which Erich Von Däniken has given in 25 countries, over 500 of them were presented at universities. Fluent in 4 languages, Erich Von Däniken is an avid researcher and compulsive traveler, averaging 100,000 miles each year to remote spots of the Earth. This enables him to closely examine the phenomena about which he writes. Please welcome Erich Von Däniken on the title Chariots of the Gods. The mysteries continues. I'm very honored.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to be here in Norway for the second time in my life. Now, whenever I start talking about my speciality, the visitors from outer space in the past, people ask me, but Erich, how did it all start? What was the first idea? I shortly like to explain you this. I'm Swiss. I'm educated in Switzerland, and for 6 years I was in a Swiss boarding school, Catholic boarding school, led by Jesuits. There we had to translate parts of the Bible from Greek to Latin, from Latin to German. And that's how it all started. I was a very, very deep believer in God, and I still am a deep believer in creation, the spirit of the universe. But of course, my God, when I was a boy, this God, for example, had to be timeless. You know, God doesn't need an experiment and to wait what the result will be. He knows it in advance. Of course, God is omnipresent. He doesn't need the vehicle in which to move around. Now, while making these translations from one language to the other, I realized that this God in the Bible couldn't be the real God, the spirit of the universe. So I simply wanted to find out what other societies in antiquity say about their beginning of religion. And that's how it all started. Now, after 50 years now, because in the meantime I'm 65, I'm quite an old man. After 50 years now, I'm proud to present you some of the incredible results of my research. So, here you will see some of the results of nearly 40 years of research. In Peru, south of Lima, 470 kilometers south of Lima, there is the famous plain of Nazca. Nazca is a desert. But when you are down on the ground with your car or by foot, you see absolutely nothing. It's just sand and brown little stones. But soon, as you fly over Nazca, something incredible happened. The first thing you see are these gigantic figures, but they are of such overdimensional size that you can see them only from the air. On ground, you see nothing. For the moment, the scientists believe, the community here believes, that these might be, well, something like family signs. Well, why not? This is possible. But how could these families see their own signs or the signs of the next families? You have to fly over it. Nothing to see from the ground. By the way, the next thing you see flying over the plane is something like airfield, airstrips, and then thousands of small lines. In total, we have 2,763 of the small lines. The longest of the small ones is 23 kilometers long, in one line, over hills and mountains and ending directly in one of these airstrip-looking ones. And this one really looks to me like an airstrip. All true, it's not modern. It's thousands of years old. Now we have been educated in a way that we don't even have the courage to look at it. We say, it can't be an airstrip, it must be something completely different. Well, nobody knows what it was. In the beginning, a German mathematician, Miss Maria Reiche, a lady from Dresden in Germany, she came here as a young lady, and she was fascinated by this mystery in the desert, and she spent her life hoping to solve the mystery. Miss Maria Reiche died 1.5 years ago without solving the mystery. At one time, she believed that it has something to do with the calendar, because in fact, on 21st of March, it happened that the sun rising directly over one of the small lines. But that was only true for 6 lines. What about the other 2,670, which have nothing to do with the calendar? Then Jim Woodman came. Jim Woodman is an American hobby archaeologist. He proposed that Nazca was nothing else than a landing place or starting place for hot air balloons of the Inca rulers. Well, about 500 years in the past, the Spanish conquerors came here to Peru. And the Incas definitely had no hot air balloons. Other solutions have been brought forward. A Swiss professor suggested that all this was something like religion, high religion. He suggested that the Indian boys had to run through these signs and figures. But it was not a good solution, because first of all, you cannot see the signs from the ground, and second, many of the big pictures are not in the ground, they are on the hills and on the mountains, and you cannot run through them. Again, every 2 years you read in the newspapers new solutions concerning Nazca. You can really die in an orgy of cult. It has been suggested it was a cult for the mountain gods. What are the proofs? It is a cult for the earth gods. What are the proofs? It is a cult for the water gods. Always cults for the gods. Which gods? Where are the proofs? It's all just suggestions. The simple truth is we don't know what it was thousands of years ago. Now, in public, you have the opinion that all these signs exist only on the ground, on the flat ground in the desert. But this is not true. This picture I took in a mountain. What should I suggest? What does it look like? Was it an airstrip with parallel lines? And what about this here? In the scientific literature, you can read that it was very easy to make it. Well, maybe 2 or 3 Indian generations worked on it. But this can't be true either. You see, we are here in the mountain. I'm talking about a society who had no dynamite, who had no iron, who were Stone Age people. All they had was their hands. It has been suggested again in the scientific literature, it was easy to make because the Indians simply had to scratch away the surface stones. But this can't be true either. Under this line, you see a zigzag line here. And you see the zigzag line still appears here. If this would be the result by scratching away the surface, then you would scratch away the zigzag line too. And this is not only in the mountain the case, also down in the desert. You see, first we had some signs, and later the airstrip locking line. And really, I'm disappointed so many times about the medias. When the medias speak about Nazca, they only present to the public some of the small lines or some of the signs, but you never see something like this in the media. Watch this carefully and keep it in your memory, because you don't see it. Just to make this airstrip locking line, they had to flat the whole mountain. Who did this, and for what purpose? It's incredible, Natska. The mystery is not solved. The mystery continues. And by flying in the mountains 2 years ago, all of a sudden, I had this under my camera, under my lens. Now, what is this? It's definitely geometry. You see 8 squares, rings with hundreds of dots, bigger rings with bigger dots. Soon as you go higher into the air, you realize that the figure becomes bigger. Now you have 2 squares around it. And all the dots and the lines, they continue even if the hill is broken. Going higher again, the figure becomes higher. Starts down here. Now, I really don't know what this is, but one thing is absolutely clear. You can see it only from the air. If you would work up here as a tourist, all what you have under your feet is a dot. You cannot overlook it. Somebody in the deep past has made geometrical signs for someone else who was flying. That's a simple fact. Whatever the gods are named. Now you don't have to fly to Peru to see strange things. You find them in Europe too. Here we are on the small island of Malta in the Mediterranean Sea. Malta has 20 megalithic temples. We know for sure that at least 3 of them must be older than 10,000 years in the past. But there is another thing on Malta. Look at these strange grooves here. The locals call it cart ruts. Now it has been suggested that this was a sort of rails to transport the big stones to the temples. But this can't be, because these lines do not guide to the temple, kilometers away from the temples. And on different places in Malta, you can prove that the line sank under the water of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, 10,000 years ago, nobody was constructing underwater. So the water was rising up. And what is true here, I can prove worldwide. Here two examples. We are in French Brittany, near the small city of Karnak. Since thousands of years, we have stone lines. Altogether was about 15,000 stones. And of course, mankind is asking, my goodness, what is this? What should it be? All kinds of suggestions have been brought forward, but no result. At one time, the farmers in the region here believed that the stones themselves contained something valuable, like gold or silver. There's something inside. Now there can be big hammers and broke the stones off. Of course, there was nothing inside. A Christian legend even suggests that these are Roman soldiers transformed into stone. Only nowadays, when modern measurements were made, we realized something completely new. All the stone lines in Malta are not just laid out by coincidence. It's all geometry. We find a lot of Pythagorean triangles. Maybe you remember from your school, Pythagoras was a Greek mathematician about 450 BC. And Pythagoras, he came up with quite some geometrical rules, like a square plus b square is equal to c square, and so on. All this was Pythagoras. But Pythagoras has nothing to do with all this, because this is 5,000 years older than Pythagoras. And we have a problem. On the one hand, we know for sure that our Stone Age people did not realize high geometry. On the other hand, we have the fact of the stones laid out in a geometrical pattern. And again, when was it? At what date? In French Brittany, in 2 places, the stone lines go directly under the sea. On this position here, 16 meters underwater, we have 2 stone rings. So what was true for the Mediterranean Sea and Malta is true for the Atlantic Ocean. Also the Atlantic Ocean was rising. And if this is true, what about the Pacific? The same thing. In the past years, south of the island of Okinawa, Japan, more and more underwater buildings have been found. Even step pyramids underwater. So it must have been after or during the last ice age, when the ice was melting and the water worldwide was coming up higher and higher floating. So we came up to dates with 10 to 12 or 13,000 BC. Our archaeologists don't like these kind of datings, but the facts are here. There is nothing to say against it. Something is wrong in our past. And we start to develop and to find with new and fresh eyes things which we know since centuries that they are there, but with the old questions. In the past, we have been thought that this is a calendar, Stone Age. For heaven's sake, what for? Calendar? No, noch nicht, geht zurück. Okay, lass weiterlaufen, komm. So, lass es weiterlaufen. For what purpose should Stone Age people need this sort of calendar? Well, it was said it is very, very important to know in advance. The priest wanted to know in advance is when spring is coming, when the weather becomes hot or cold. It was important for agriculture. I'm sorry, for what agriculture? There was no agriculture in Stone Age. Now it turns out that all the lines, the rings of Stone Age, realize a model of our solar system, including the asteroid belt. But in Stone Age, nobody could know anything about the asteroid belt. Now, you could believe that this is sheer coincidence. Okay, by coincidence it happened. No, it's not coincidence, and I will prove it. Because worldwide we have these phenomenons, and they always date back thousands of years to the past, and they always have to do something with the gods. With which gods? Here we are in Mexico. When you visit Mexico next summer, don't miss it. It's just about 40 kilometers away from Mexico City. When the Spanish came up here, around 500 years in the past, this was all covered completely. But the Aztecs were living up here. So the Spanish were asking the Aztecs, what is this? And they said, we only know it in ruins, but they knew the name. They called it Teotihuacan. In the Aztec language, Teotihuacan means more or less point where the gods meet together with the humans. Now, archaeology suggests that the beginning of the planning and the first building took place about 1000 to 1200 BC, which means we are in Stone Age up here again. But what sort of Stone Age head or genius must have been planning here? First of all, they start to plan a large road, like the Champs-Élysées in Paris. And for reasons which we do not understand, the road is laid out in the direction of north-south. What for? Stone Age planning, Stone Age heads. Why should they plan a road lying out in the direction of north-south? And they took care that the road has 2 different points of views. From the upper side, you see it like this. As soon as you look at it from the lower side, it turns out to be an endless stairway, melting with the pyramid in the back. The stairways to the gods. To which gods? In the meantime, we found out that all the buildings are not just laid out on the road by coincidence. Every building is exactly standing for one planet in our solar system. I mean, the eclipse. You see it here. Teotihuacan is a model, a small model of our solar system, including Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Now, Pluto, again, was just discovered in our century. They could not know it. Now, it is not my idea that extraterrestrials made constructions like this. No. It is not my idea that extraterrestrials moved stone blocks around, neither in Stone Age, nor in French Brittany, nor here. They never used their hands, but the purpose was another one. Some thousands of years ago, this planet was visited by beings from outer space. You can read this very, very clearly in the old Indian texts, in the holy books in Sanskrit. They write that long time ago, gigantic cities surrounded our planet. From these cities, smaller vehicles have come down. The old Indians called them the Vimanas. And out of the Vimanas, the teachers from heaven descended. Now, our forefathers at that time were in Stone Age. They were, seen from a technical point of view, primitives. The so-called gods, the extraterrestrials, knew, of course, that the primitives were intelligent. Intelligence means by having your consciousness, by being able to create culture, music, paintings, and so on. And of course, intelligence means asking questions, be curious. That's why we have a scientific curiosity. So all they had to do is to give order in the past. Now come on. Now you bring 1,000 stones and put it directly in this line here. The natives, the primitives, did not understand why. Why should we do this? It was not important to know why. They simply had to make a geometrical pattern. Because the extraterrestrials knew thousands of years in the future generations have to ask questions because they are intelligent. Intelligent means questioning, curiosity. They would ask, what is this? And sooner or later, they would find out that here we have geometry. Or in this case, sooner or later, the generations of the future would find out that this is a small model of our solar system. And only when you have these answers, you start to ask new questions. I mean, when a fellow like me comes up and asks the question, have we maybe been visited from outer space? It's not just fantasy, the question. I ask the question because I have indications which force me to ask the questions. But without the indications, I would not ask the question. The same thing here. We have indications worldwide, all dating back to Stone Age. They all have to do with some gods, whatever the gods is. Now we have the results. And we have to ask questions, are we maybe, or have we maybe been visited from outer space? If we accept this question, then we ask the next one. We say, well, if there was a visit, where is the proof? Should these visitors not have left something written, something really clear? But without the indications, we don't go on and ask the question. This is very near. This is in Denmark. You probably know it. It's called the Trelleborg. Trelleborg, it's a Viking place. But when the Danish archaeologists, they discovered this, they also found bones and spears from Stone Age. So the question has come up, if these walls here, these ring walls, are not much older than the Vikings. The Danish archaeologists discovered these strange formations in the ground. They didn't know what it was. The suggestion was, well, maybe that was the basic or a down for Viking ships. What for? Why should the Vikings put their ships over two of these ring walls? And the next sea is about 4.5 kilometers away. One day, a friend of mine, a Danish pilot, he flew over the Trelleborg. And just being up there, this made him curious. He said to me later, it looked to me like a parabolic antenna. And simply by an idea, he asked himself, what happened? Where would my flight guide me when I fly exactly in this direction, over the cross, and I continue in one straight line? And he did it. After 114.6 kilometers, the second Viking wall, Viking fortress, was behind him. After 212 kilometers, the third was behind him, always in one straight line. After 296 kilometers, number 4 was directly under his line. So something couldn't work here. Why should the Viking make their fortresses in one direct lines? And it's interrupted by hills and sea and so on. Being back again, the Danish friend, Mr. Hansen, he drew the line, he continued the line, it passed Berlin, over Europe, over the Alps, and ended directly in Greece, in Delphi. And under the line, always Stone Age remains, like tombs, menhirs, and so on. So Delphi is the guiding point. What is in Delphi? Do you remember? Delphi was the world-known oracle. But long before Delphi was an oracle, Delphi had another name. Delphi was the navel of the world. Why? Why is such a place called the navel of the world? Mythology has an answer. Of course, mythology is something which you cannot catch. Mythology you can never date. Mythology is just something living in the brains of the people. Mythology says that long time in the past, Godfather Zeus, you say here, Zeus in Germany, he had two eagles flying over the planet. And at the point where the two eagles met together, Delphi was constructed. His son, Apollo, came down here in a flying chariot or in a flying bark. In the beginning, the people was afraid of Apollon, but he was a very helpful god. He taught them in mathematics. He helped them. He even educated some doctors in medicine. And also, the mythology says, every year, twice, Apollo took his flying ship, his flying bark, and flew to a faraway land in the north, behind the winds of the north. That was the land of the Hyperborean. They are Hyperboreer of Dutch. Hyperborean, what a word. So this is mythology. I have a possible explanation. Of course, Mr. Apollo was one of the extraterrestrials, and he was studying the groups of mankind like today's ethnologists were doing it. And of course, he helped them a little by giving them advice in such and such cases. From time to time, he took his small ship and flew on a direct line from today's Delphi to today's Denmark. He made a stop every, I don't know, 200, 300 kilometers, and he taught and observed people. Now the people, they started to construct temples or whatever, holy places for their god Apollo. The people did not realize that their temples were in one straight line for thousands of kilometers. Apollo knew it, of course. And he may have said to himself, let them do it, doesn't matter, thousands of years in the future. The intelligence of the generations will start to ask questions. How is this possible? Something is wrong here. And that was exactly the point. In the center of Delphi, this stone was worshipped. This is called the omphalos. And now, something strange happened. Seen from Delphi, every real old Greek holy point is under a geometrical pattern. You will just realize it. You can divide every distance in the so-called golden dawn. Then you have a smaller part and you have a bigger part. That's the bigger part. Now the bigger part of the golden dawn is the distance between Delphi of Nemea. Or take Olympia Delphi. Hang on a 90-degree angle. It brings you up to Dodoni. Dodoni is another oracle in old Greece. Again, you have a triangle. Now you divide this in the golden dawn, and the bigger part of it corresponds to the distance Delphi Olympia. Now this goes on for 22 Greek holy places. Now, of course, it has been suggested, well, old Greece had wonderful mathematicians like, for example, Euclid. Even Plato was working in geometry. So maybe these wise men, they have given order that the holy temples, the holy places in all ancient Greece have to be in a geometrical pattern. But this doesn't work, because each and every place is much older than Euclid or Plato. They existed all as holy places in Stone Age times. So who gave the order that the old places in Greek have to lay under a geometrical pattern. The fact is easy to control. You just need a Greek map. Is this map. This map was found in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. And at that time, for this case, we know who made it. It was a Turkish admiral. His name is Piri Reis. And he made this map in the year 1513. Now, Piri Reis not only made a map, he was writing also. And he wrote that he composited this map out of 20 older maps, which was given to him as a present in Alexandria. So there were first 20 older maps coming in the hand of Admiral Piri Reis, and out of these 20 maps, he made that one. Now this one is only one part. You see, the second part here, the second half, does not exist. In reality, the map should continue here. But even this part is mystery enough. Just up here, you see French Brittany. Here you see Spain. Here is Gibraltar. Then follows Africa. But what is down here at the lower end of the map? The map was studied carefully on several universities. A grid was constructed, and the map of Piri Reis was transferred onto a globe. And there is no doubt, whatever is down here is the Antarctic, with every little island and each detail, which today for us is lying under a thick level of ice. Even Mr. Piri Reis in the year 1513 could not have known nothing about the Antarctic, because it did not exist at his time. What was even discovered? So he made this map out of older maps, which means someone in the deep past knew the Antarctic with every little detail, every island, or it is an aerial photograph taken from high away with modern technology. Now, in fact, I'm looking for indications to prove that this planet was visited from outer space a long time ago. And I could make it very easy for myself, because till today we have living mythologies. We have people, cultures, which have thousands of years histories in the past, and they took their history like a time machine into our present. This is a case of the Hopi Indians. The Hopi Indians, they live in Arizona in the United States. Since long time, many hundreds of years, the Hopi Indians make these small dolls. They are different of these dolls, but also they are different. They all have the same name. They are all called kachinas. And what is a kachina? Well, ask the Hopi. The kachinas were the teachers from heaven for their ancestors, thousands of years in the past. And the Hopi still today make the kachinas simply for two reasons. That we don't think that we are the greatest, that we have developed everything by ourselves, and that nobody should be afraid when the kachinas return in the future, because they have promised to return in a faraway future. Now the same thing we have with an Indian tribe on the upper Amazon River. This tribe is called the Kayapos. Every year they have a festivity, and one of their medicine men draw himself in this straw garment here. The rest of the tribe is dancing around him, and they sing the story of this straw garment man. Long time ago, noise appeared on the nearby mountain, and out of a cloud of smoke and fire, a being looking like this appeared. The people were afraid. The stranger came down to the village, and after 2 days, he knew their language. Later he explained that he had to learn their language first. He became their teacher. He was the one who installed their first school, the so-called House of Youth, still existing today. He also taught them in astronomy. They know everything about our solar system, again including Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, of course in their own language, in their own words. But they know the composition of our solar system. And before he left again to the stars, he promised that he will return in a far-away future, so that the people may never forget his promise, and that nobody of the future is afraid. They still today make every year the ceremony and the dances in honor of this teacher from heaven. Now this is living mythology, ladies and gentlemen. This is not just something dead. It's not the question of us to interpret it. We can go there and we ask them. I was there twice. And it's just wonderful, the story they tell us. And it's not too apt to come, no, you cannot look at this way. You have to see this psychologically or religiously. No. We have information which has come down from above down to us. Information, for example, about astronomy, solar system, Pluto. No natural God, no God in nature like earthquake or stars or sun or whatever gives information. And he promised to return in a faraway future. That's why they are doing it. They're expecting it. Like the Hopis in Arizona, USA. I made anyhow a strange, I learned something strange in this world. Simply looked, we have two types, two kinds of human beings on this planet. One type is educated religiously. They believe that God made everything. He made the plants and the trees and the animals, but as the crown of creation, he made us. The other part is rather scientifically orientated. They know everything about mutation, selection, and so on, but on the top of evolution, we stand. Have you ever realized that in both cases, if we are the crown of creation or the top of evolution, we look at us as the biggest? Something like us does not exist anymore in the universe. We look at us as unique. And in fact, we don't want extraterrestrials because they cut our uniqueness. This is a psychological problem, which still scientists and journalists have. We believe that we are something unique in the universe. And that's not true. And that's what I'm fighting against it. This universe is full of living creatures, intelligent beings, and quite a lot of them have similarities to us. I explain this later, why this has to be the way it is. Now we have mythology, we have living mythology demonstrated in two cases. For this I could add 20 more cases of living mythology. If I just think at the Dogon tribe in Central Africa. They have similar dances in honor of their gods from outer space and so on. But we do not only have mythology, we also, of course, have hard facts, things which you can touch, which you can photograph. I suggest that one day you go to Peru, climb up as high as possible. Here we are 3,500 meters in the Peruvian mountains over the city of Cusco. Now, once you are in Peru, your guide will explain you immediately how an Inca wall looks. This is typical in Inca. Once you know one Inca wall, the way they constructed, they made their walls, you know all of them. From 300-meter distance, you can say, oh, look at there, there's another Inca wall. So this is classical, typical Inca. But this is not Inca. We are 3,800 meters high, again in Peru, over the city of Cusco. And this is complete different construction than Inca. It looks as if it would be concrete, polished, flat. Now, when the Spanish came up here, around 500 years ago, all this was already existing. The Spanish asked the Incas, what is it? And they said, well, this dates back to the times of the gods. Which gods? What tools, what technology have these gods used? Going higher, here we are in Bolivia, 4,100 meters high. That's why you see no tree, nothing, because we are so high. On the other hand, there's no ice and snow because we are very close to the equator. Gigantic platforms are laying up here, made out of granite and diorite. Now, diorite is harder than granite. This is diorite. To cut diorite, you definitely need metal tools. Forget about every other thing like stone chisels or wood chisels and so on. Now, archaeology suggests that these are the remains of a temple of the Aymara. The Aymara are wonderful highland Indians living up there on the Lake Titicaca. But at that time, they were in Stone Age time. They had no hard metal, no metal at all. The biggest platform once was 89 meters in one piece. In the meantime, it's broken. The calculated weight of it is about 900 tons. The Aymara, 4,000 meters high, without any wood for wooden rollers, had no chance to move a platform, 900 tons. With or without wood, it doesn't matter. Now, when a stone chiseler, stone mason comes and cuts out some part of a block, because, of course, the next block had to fit in perfectly. But look how complicated these blocks are calculated. How many angles, rectangulars, squares. Still today, we would have problems to make out in such a precision this rectangular, the little dot in between. So this means for sure there was a planning, because the next block has to fit on it. There was planning. Now the Aymara, they had not even writing. And even if somebody comes and says to me, come on, Erich, I mean, the block exists. By the way, this is only one of them, there are hundreds of it. The block exists, so in a way or another, they must have done it. Okay? Now explain me for what purpose. For what purpose does a Stone Age society need such a precision? What's the purpose of it? We were up there many times, and we measured 25 of these blocks, on the millimeter, very precise. Back home again, we made a computer program, and we wanted to know what fits together in here. And there you stand. It's all prefabricated stone blocks, like a Lego. But there is an evolution, not only an evolution in biology, there is also an evolution in technology. I mean, usually, you start slowly, doing primitive stone chiselings, and later you learn more and more. But here, the evolution of technology is upside down completely, because the most perfect blocks are the oldest ones. Later, only rubbish was added to it. What I said before about Cusco is true here. 500 years ago, the Spanish conquerors come up here. All these stones were laying around. The Spanish asked the Inca, what is this? You can find the answer in the book of Piedra de Ciega de León, who was a Spanish chronicle in his second volume of History of Peru. The Incas answered that no human being has ever seen this place in order. It was always destroyed. But long, long time ago, this was the residence of their god Viracocha. When Viracocha left the earth, he himself destroyed his own residence. The purpose was that no Indian tribe should rule over the others. That's why he destroyed his own residence. Now in this case, I suggest we have it to do with something like a basic camp of the extraterrestrials. Would that mean that extraterrestrials need stone? Would they work with stone? Is this not too primitive? Don't they have other materials and so on? Ladies and gentlemen, in 20 or 30 years, we will fly to the moon. And on Moon and later on Mars, we will make our human installations. Of course, we will not transport from the Earth to the moon something like metal or iron. No, it's too heavy. All what we take to these planets are our modern tools, of course. Then dynamite, everything which is artificial, of course, but not the basic material. We know that we have stones on Moon and on Mars. And stone is a wonderful raw material. Stone doesn't burn. It protects us against hard rays. It protects us against winds. On Mars, for example, you have winds. We will use stones, stone blocks on other planets, but of course with prefabricated material, as we see it here. In our century, something very, very strange happened to our ethnologists. Whenever a technological high society came together with a technologically lower society, a new cult occurred. In ethnology, the cult is called cargo cult. The one from the lower technology cannot understand what a helicopter is. He never saw this before. So he cannot run to his tribe and say, hey, out there a helicopter is landing. No, he doesn't know what it is in the beginning. He has no word for it. For him, something with loud noise and thundering is coming down from the clouds. The first ethnologist who visited New Guinea was Frank Hurley. He wrote in his diary, every evening the natives came with the canoe to my airplane, and here they sacrificed a pork. For himself, they only sacrificed a chicken. So the pork was not sacrificed for the human being. The pork was sacrificed for the aircraft. In their meaning, the aircraft was a gigantic bird of the gods. They could not differentiate between technology and living beings. For them, the aircraft itself was a living being. In the Second World War, America was fighting against Japan, for example, in the Pacific Ocean. And of course, they made their landings with propellant aircrafts. And after the Americans flew away when the Second World War was over, for example, on the island of Wewak, the natives started to construct aircraft locking things out of wood and straw. And they worshipped it as something from the gods, from the magical world of the gods. In this case, the natives could not even name it. They could not say, well, this is an aircraft. They have no word like aircraft. They cannot say, and here we have a propeller. They don't know what it is. They simply imitate and copy the outside looking form, shape. And they worship it as something from the gods. In modern time, in ethnology, this is called cargo cult. And there are hundreds of examples in our days. There's a big literature about cargo cults, which simply proves whenever a high technology comes together with a lower or primitive technology, the lower one cannot understand it and they start to worship it. It's misunderstanding technology. And what happened in our century, we can prove throughout history, thousands of years in the past. It all started in old Sumeria. On the cylinder seals, and there exist hundreds of it, on the cylinder seals you find the ships, the heavenly barks in sky, in the heaven, higher than the moon. In Central America, it doesn't matter what population what tribe you take, call it the Mayas, call it the Aztecs, call it the Olmecs, it doesn't matter. Each and every of them believed that their gods are living in the clouds in a big residence, and from this residence in the clouds, the gods are descending to teach mankind. Now, 20,000 or 25,000 kilometers away, on the other end of the world, the same thing happened. In ancient China, the first emperors were the heavenly emperors, the emperors from the sky. All China started because of this. Still today in China, you have different temples of the heavenly emperors. Tempel der himmlischen Kaiser, still today. Now this is a worldwide phenomenon. In old Japan, it was about 1200 BC. Japan was in Stone Age at that time. Of a sudden, hundreds of these kind of figures appeared. And they were worshipped because they were standing on altars. So they took them for something gods, godlike. But also in Japanese Stone Age, they knew nothing about these kind of glasses, these kinds of soot. So what were they copying? Imitating technology, which they themselves could not understand. The world is full with these things. Every museum has it. And we call it, of course, figures of the gods. Well, figures of what gods? I do not think that our ancestors were primitive. No. They were intelligent, and they have definitely not worked for centuries and centuries to construct, to create the greatest and most beautiful temples on planet just for imaginary gods, for gods which never existed. Oh no, they were sure these gods existed once in the past to our forefathers. And they were always afraid that these gods would return. That's why they made their temple. Today, in our century, we use the word temple. We don't think about it. What is a temple? What was a temple in the past? Nothing but the building for the gods, constructed for the gods, hoping that the gods would descend from the sky and live in these constructions. That's why you use money, gold, silver, work, labor work. It doesn't matter what. For the gods, they did everything. But the gods once were real, not just imagination. And this is what we have to learn. And these gods will return one day. So cargo cult, we can prove in our century. Fact. In the past, the same thing took place. I shortly mentioned the Maya, the culture of the Maya in Central America. The oldest Maya city is Tikal in today's Yucatan, Guatemala. Tikal. Now Tikal was founded on an impossible place because in Tikal there is no water. The next water, the next lake, is 40 kilometers away. There is no river, nothing. Because the next water is 40 kilometers away, the Maya had to make artificial water channels from the sea into Tikal. This is artificially 40 kilometers away. So why, for God's heaven, do they have to live here? Why not 40 kilometers on the lake? It's more practical. This is just a model of Tikal. And in the ruins, of course, Maya writings were found. Now you have to know clearly that from the Maya writings, all what we definitely know is their mathematical system. This is known. Also their calendar. The Maya calendar is very complicated, but we know it exactly how it functions. And of course, we know some of the glyphics of their rulers. We know the names of their rulers. And all the rest is a question of interpretation. One broken stone was found here. A few words were able to decipher. And the writing said, "Here the God from heaven descended." Which God? From which heaven? Was this the purpose why they had to construct it at that place and not on the near lake? Because they were expecting the recoming of their God. And how did they represent their God from heaven? They did it on stelas. This is a stone about 2.5 meters high. It's called a stela. Chiseling on it. The head is missing. And archaeology calls this here the pre-classic stela from Tikal. There are many of them, not only one. You see 2 hands, 2 fingers, 2 gloves. Here. The elbows, the underarm, the upper arm. Then coming down here. What is this? No, it makes a curve and goes into this box. Now the Maya themselves, on their feet, they had nothing or sandals. But this strange being, look at this. What he has on his feet. To me, it looks technical, whatever it is, I don't know. Misunderstanding technology. And that's one of the examples. Another one, which I find very convincing, is down in the ground here, under this pyramid. We are in Mexico. The place is called Palenque. In 1941, this was all covered, completely covered by the wood. And then the Mexican archaeologist, Professor Rutz, and his students start to make the digging here. Kann ich das scharf rein hier? No, on the other side. Ja, das ist ein Blödsinn. Okay. So, up here, a lot of writings were found. That's why this pyramid is not called pyramid in the Maya language. They call it the Temple of Inscription. And then down here, there was something like small holes and a rectangular groove. So a big stone platform was cut out here on this place. Inside, there was a stairway going down into the pyramid. But in 1949, this stairway, was filled completely with big stones. So somebody was digging something down there and filled it up with stone again. Finally, the Professor Rutz and his students came under the ground of the pyramid, about 3 meters. There was a stone in the form of a triangle. This triangle stone was put away, and they looked inside here into a room. But at that time, it was in 1959, the archaeologists, they could not enter the room. The door was open, but they could not enter it. Why not? The whole room was completely filled with stalactites and stalagmites. Full. So all these stalactites have been broken off, and the ground was cleared. Now we have a stone plate. This is 3 meters 80 long, 2 meters 20 large. One block, around 9 tons, heavy of 9 tons. And on this, an incredible chiseling. You see a man bending forward, almost like a racing motorcyclist. He has something like a mask on his nose. He uses his 2 hands to manipulate control. Look, the upper hand, the lower hand, he's winding up something. He's sitting on a sort of chair, and around him is something like a frame. And just at the end, you see again something like a linking flame. Now, after the discovery of this, the Maya world was shocked. But then they realized, of course, it is Maya culture, so it has to be explained in the culture of Maya. Professor Rutz, who was the discoverer, he suggested that this is an Indian boy. And this Indian boy is sitting on a sacrificial altar. Later, other professors, specialists came on with new explanations. Professor Dr. Alden Mason, he is an American archaeologist, he said, no, here we have obviously one teeth and another one. Altogether it makes the open mouth of a mythological monster. They mean the monster of the earth. But then they suggested, you clearly can see that this is a priest, they suggested. The priest falls into the open mouth of this mythological monster. So on this part is dead. But here you see the cross of life, which means death and life is represented on one stone. Now we are really a strange society. We read something like this. Here you see the cross of life. You can clearly see it. And everybody accepts it. Yes, it's a cross of life. My goodness, there is nothing like a cross of life. A cross of life does not exist. It's just an invention. Somebody uses a word and the rest of this planet accepts it. It's just rubbish. It's nonsense. In the minds of my admired archaeologists, this in the back here has of course nothing to do with a linking flame or with an exhaust or with hot air or with hot gases. Oh no, in their feeling, these here are the stylized hairs of the beard of the weather god. There are many of these things. I could explain you every little detail if we had time for it. You see the Quetzal bird. I don't see any. This, for example, really strange. It's the cut tail of the rattle. Mamma mia. So, I have been accused that it is not correct to present to my audience this stone in the form I do it. Because when you come down the stair, it's in reality from this side. Which means they suggest you have to look at the stone in another way. You have to turn it up so it would look like this. Okay, let's do this. Now, I of course admit I am a man with a lot of fantasy. And soon as I see something like this, my fantasy starts to work. And I say to myself, come on, you know this, from a complete different place on earth. I just invite you for a short trip. We come back here. Let's jump 20,000 kilometers away from Mexico down to India. It doesn't matter if you take India or Burma or Java, it doesn't matter what. Here we are in Middle Java. This temple is called the Borobudur. And the Borobudur is composed of hundreds of so-called stupas. You know, this here is called a stupa in Buddhistic architecture. It looks like a bell. It's a stupa. Now, in Buddhistic tradition, the stupa has different meanings. But we can forget about Buddhistic traditions because the architectural form of the stupa is much older than Buddhism. Even the predecessors of the Buddhists was the religion of the Jaina. They knew the form of the stupa. And in their meaning, the stupa had only one sense. The stupa was an object with which you could reach the gods. So they believed if you go in here, if you climb in here, then you feel like a god. That's why in every of these stupas, a young man is sitting. Now this is a Buddhistic temple, that's why young Buddha is sitting in here. What is he doing? He uses his hands. He feels like a god because he's in the vehicle of the god. And let's return now to Mexico. If you look at it this way, here you have the tower of the stupa. You have the shape of the bell of the stupa. In here my friend sits with his elbow and his hands manipulating some controls. So in my eyes, misunderstanding technology in the east, in the north, in the south, and in the west. And we made psychology and religion out of it. Concerning Egypt, old Egypt is full of mysteries. When you talk to Egyptologists about the Great Pyramid, they say there are no mysteries. There's nothing. We know exactly what happened here. It was 2500 BC, a pharaoh with the name of Cheops. He was the constructor. 100,000 men, slaves maybe, we don't know, helped him. And within 20 years, the building was finished. And in the building, there are only two rooms. The upper room is called the king's chamber. The lower room is called the queen's chamber. And there is another room down in the rock, 37 meters in the rock, which is called the unfinished chambers. And of course, you have the corridors which guide you to these chambers. All the rest is stone, nothing. There are no holes in it, no rooms in it, nothing. This is the scientific approach to it. Well, what do the old Arabs say to this? With old Arabs, I do not mean an old man of today. I mean the Arabic historians, like Abdel al-Mas'udi, that was 12th century, Abdel al-Makrisi. These people who have been brilliant men, hundreds of years in the past, they were closer to the building than we are today, closer to the information of the building. What do they say about the pyramid? A complete different story. The old Arabic historians say, well, all this took place before the Great Flood. Mankind at that time was so primitive that they were living, eating and drinking together with the animals. But then the heavens opened, and out of the clouds, barks, ships, descended to mankind. And out of the ships, the teachers from heaven. These teachers first constructed schools in Egypt. But then they forced these primitive beings to visit these schools. The most intelligent of the human beings at that time, his name was Saurit. And then the Arabic historian clearly say, Saurit is the same which the Hebrew call Enoch. And they know what I am talking about, because they quote all their forefathers too. Enoch, son of, son of, son of, until down to Adam and Eve. Just a little interruption. According to Arabian tradition, this took place before the Great Flood. Now they say Saurit, the Arabian name, is the most intelligent. Saurit is the same which the Hebrew call Enoch. So who is Enoch? Just go at the Bible, the Old Testament. Enoch is one of the 10 patriarchs before the Great Flood. And according to the Bible, Enoch is the first human being who left our planet in a fiery chariot. This make me thinking. So now I stay with the Arabian name, Enoch. These teachers from heaven, they taught him how to write. And they dictated him 300 books. Enoch or Saurit, the same figure. And while he was writing, one of these teachers came and said a terrible flood, a catastrophe of water would destroy the surface of the earth. And then Saurit said, well, in that case, it was all for nothing. He learned writing. He has been writing books. Now, the water would float everything away, and the next generation after the great flood, the survivors, they have to start it all over again from the beginning. So he asked for permission to make a gigantic construction. The teachers from heaven, they accepted this idea, and what they did, the teacher, they forced him to construct the building here, on this place, not on another place. They said, this is the exact place where you have to construct it. So Saurit and his men constructed the Great Pyramid. And in the pyramid, he made a lot of small rooms. And in these rooms, all his books were deposited. After the construction, Saurit covered the whole pyramid from up to down with stone plates. And this is a fact. You still have some of these stone plates here. Centuries in the past, all this was completely covered with stones. Where are they now? The Arabs in the past centuries, they took the stones away because they were cut in such a proper way that they can use it for their homes, for their buildings, for their mosques. That's why it looks so terrible today. So the gods from outer space, or the teachers from heaven, they have not moved stones around here. Saurit did it, and his people. But the gods commanded, this is the place where you must build it, and they helped him with the planning. That's what the old Arabian historians say. Now, our today's Egyptologists, they of course say, this is all nonsense. There are no secret chambers in here with books. There's nothing. We just have the two chambers, the Queen's chamber and the King's chamber. And there's nothing else. What are you talking about? Who is right? The old writers or our modern knowledge? When you as a tourist today, you climb into the pyramid, you have to climb into this small hole. Why not up here? That rather looks like an entry. In the year 823 BC, the whole building was still covered with stones. So there was no entry to see, absolutely nothing. At that time, Al-Mamun was the ruler over Egypt. He decided to go into the pyramid. Now, because there was no entry, he simply chiseled one piece out of the pyramid. When you enter today as a tourist, you enter in here, and your first feeling is that you're going into a mountain, into a grot. You see, it doesn't look like a pyramid inside. Once you are in there, after 5.5 meters, you have to make your decision. If you go up or if you go down. In the rock, when you look it from this way, you are 37 meters in the rock. If you take this diagonal, this is 118 meters. And that's how it looks like. 118 meters. And here the first mystery begins. Just imagine how they have done it. So, there was a rock, okay? There was no pyramid on the rock. There was just a rock. So a group of workers received the order, now you chisel. Okay, in what direction? Exactly the way. You cannot go 1 millimeter on the left, on the side, or you cannot change your angle. You have to exactly do it like this. Now, all they have is chisels. After they are in here, let's say 20 meters, it's dark, there's no light. They see nothing. Whatever is cut out of the rock, this is the natural rock, has to be brought out somehow. So somebody always has to bring out the material which is chiseled from the ceiling and from the walls here. Now, 118 meters down. It's unbelievable. Once they are down there, in the exact angle. Oh, God, I failed it was. Okay, this is where you came down. Yeah? Then they start to make another grot, another hole. Now this time flat. Still imagine you are there. There is nothing to see. 118 meters down there. Once they are here, they start to chisel out the ceiling. It looks like this. So, big stone blocks fell on their feet. It's completely dark. Somebody always have to maneuver the stone blocks out of it. And there is only one way to transport it out. This is this way. There is no other way down. So what I cannot understand, why for God's heaven are they finishing this passage down 118 meters, while down the work is still going on. You know, as long as the work is going on, all the stones have to be brought out here, which means you could damage the wall and the ceiling. Normally, it would be you finish the room down there. When the room is finished, then you finish the passageway down to the room. But it was the other way around. Why? According Al-Mamun, Al-Mamun was the ruler of Egypt, I said before, in 823. Of course, about Al-Mamun, many legends and stories exist, and you never know what is true and what is not. One of the stories says, well, the great ruler Al-Mamun, he entered as the first human being since thousands of years into the pyramid. And in the pyramid, he found different rooms. In one room, he found glass, bending glass, which you could move. In another room, he found metal which doesn't rust. In a third room, Al-Mamun found sarcophagi, and in the sarcophagi, 4 creatures which were not human. Now, Al-Mamun, he was so impressed by the gods and the ancestors that he was afraid. He was very, very respectful about the gods and the ancestors. So he closed every room again the way he found it. And he took nothing out of it. That's legend of Al-Mamun. You don't know what is true or not. When I was down here, one day, I had a hammer with me. And I always hammered on the walls and on the side, hoping that maybe some sound would be hollowed, that I would find or detect some of the rooms of Al-Mamun. But there was nothing. It's all strange down there. You always end on the wall. The room is unfinished. At least it looks like. You have shafts going down and ending about practically on the rock. Now, the upper side of the pyramid. First, you have to climb up this pathway. And you have to go down like this. It's very hot. After 9 meters, you come in what is called the Great Gallery. And here the next mystery starts. You know, when you imagine, it is easy to construct the pyramid. Okay, you take stone blocks and stone blocks and stone blocks. Okay, good. No. Here, you have a ramp going up. It's not done by putting one stone block to the next, because it's going up in a certain angle. The stone blocks are so heavy, some of them here have 70 tons. And you could not even put a razor blade between of it. When you stand here as a tourist, look at this gigantic thing. It's 9.5 meters high. And ask yourself, who did the planning? It's not done by putting a block to the next one, because a block going in this angle up has to be cut in another way than a block which is rectangular. So ask yourself, who has ordered that block number 1,213,1210 has to be put here? Figure it. And remember that the old Egyptian historians say that Zaurit had the help of the teachers from heaven by planning, only by planning. Once you're up there, you come into the so-called King's Chamber. I say so-called because we call it King's Chamber. We don't know what the ancient called it. And about 22 meters down is the smaller chamber, which is called the Queen's Chamber. And in the Queen's Chamber, this is the south wall, you have this rectangular shaft. This is only 20 centimeter in diameter. In the literature of Egyptologists, you can read that this is only a symbolic shaft. It was only made that the soul of the pharaoh could disappear into the heavens of the gods Osiris, Isis, and so on. And the scientific literature also tells us that this shaft is a blind shaft. After about 8 meters, it would end blind. One of my friends, Rudolf Gantenbrink from Munich, he was an unbeliever. And he said, let's look really if this shaft is ending blind. And he constructed a robot. Now it was clear that you could not operate this robot in a way as you do with a toy. Because once the robot is, for example, 20 meters inside the shaft, it might be that the waves would not reach him, so you cannot give orders. So it was constructed as a heavy piece. This is about 15 kilos heavy. It looks like a tank. There are 2 special halogen lights here constructed, a special video camera, and down here is a laser beamer. With this laser beamer, you can measure the distance to the next wall. And then an incredible thing happened in the Great Pyramid. The first part is the lower part, and then it goes up in an angle of 40.3 degrees. And while you look at these pictures, ladies and gentlemen, you have to be absolutely clear that this shaft was constructed at the same time with the pyramid. It was not possible the other way around. You could not finish the pyramid. And now somebody comes and says, hey, I need a shaft. Okay. And with 20 centimeters in diameter, what do you want to do now? You put the Lilliput man in here or what? It doesn't work. So the shaft was constructed with the pyramid at the same time. That means during construction, in here there was daylight. Nothing what you see is coincidence. The builders wanted to have it this way. Daylight was here. Then the pyramid grew, and the next stone block covered it. And down in the Rudolf Gantenbrink, at the more, became bigger and bigger. The walls changed all the time. Once it was sandstone, then it was granite, then it was alabaster. Alabaster is a sort of marble. Of a sudden, the walls and the ceiling were covered with chalk. What for? They knew exactly what they were doing. And the robot was climbing inside the pyramid higher and higher and higher. The 8-meter mark was passed. The robot went up 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters, 40 meters, 50, 60, 64 meters, a door appeared. The door has something like 2, how shall I call it, bracelets. One is broken down. So the people on the video camera said, this broken piece must be down here. The robot was looking, searching for it, but there was nothing. Only later, when the robot was pulled back, they found the broken piece on the right angle down. And it is definitely a piece of metal. What are we doing now? Were we not always so certain there are no mysteries in the Great Pyramid? And the old Arabic historians, all they told us was rubbish. And this is just the beginning of it. There is much more to come. And still today, we don't know what this is. Should this be some sort of handles? Should we turn it up? Or is it maybe just the backside of something which from the other side looks completely different? If you imagine the pyramid, the point where we are now here, you still have 23 meters to the outside. Enough room. You see the door is not laying on the ground because the laser beamer passes the door. On the right side, a small triangle is missing. Black dust comes out, which is an indication there must be a continuation. Now this discovery is more or less 6 years old. One should believe that after 6 years, they finally have looked inside here. But nothing happened. It is incredible. 6 years pass, nothing goes on, nothing happens. It's a shame of Egyptology. One group of the Egyptologists say, well, this is the final stone. There is nothing behind it. We would lose time and money. And the other group says, well, we do not work under the eyes of the public. Why not? What are they afraid of it? I mean, the Americans made their moon landings under the eyes of the public. If they open this door secretly, and later they come and show us on TV the open door, and they tell us, well, as we expected, there was nothing behind it. We don't believe it anymore. The whole credibility is over. Somebody obviously is afraid, or some group, to open this door in public. Is it that maybe some books or writings are behind it? Something which would scatter the world and turn our believings upside down, or our religions, or whatever? The secret is here. These are simple facts. It's not the question of imagination. And where a door is, there is something behind. Otherwise, you don't make a door. And I said that's only the beginning of it. A few years ago, a group of scientists from the Waseda University in Tokyo, with modern X-rays, they have X-rayed the pyramid. And in their scientific report, which is not available to the public, for reasons which I don't understand either, but I have it, in the scientific report, they speak about a whole labyrinth of rooms and channels inside the pyramid. What's next to come? In this case, I don't even understand our journalists. Soon, as we have it in our society to do with politics, then the journalists are clever. They are asking questions, questions behind the questions, and so on. But in that case, they are just believers. Oh yes, that's the way. Why not asking? Somebody is lying us in this case, and I'm sure I know what I'm talking about. Everyone here knows what the Bible is, of course. And out of the Bible, I took a lot of information, like the prophet Ezekiel. Read it in the Bible. I don't have time to explain it. But what you don't know, the Bible is only a part of big, large amount of holy texts which existed 2,000 years ago already. But only from this big amount of texts, a small part of it has become the Bible. What happened to the rest of all these texts? Well, they are called apocryphic texts and pseudepigraphic texts, or old holy Jewish scriptures. And I want to demonstrate with one example what is in these texts. This example in science is called the Abraham apocryphic. Although I do not believe that Abraham wrote it down, but it doesn't matter, because the text is handed down in the first person. The first person is the I form. I did, I saw, I made, I observed. So it's an eyewitness. Doesn't matter if his name is Abraham or Mr. X. The text must be very old. A young man writes, I was 12 years old. It was evening. I worked out in the field of my parents when I saw a bright shining light coming closer to me, and at the same time I heard something like a thundering. Now this young man, he says he is 12 years old, he is afraid and he starts to run away, and he falls on the ground. Astonished, he lies on the ground, but after 2 minutes somebody took him and put him on his feet. And now he says, I saw two beings which I never saw on earth. They had a different breast from our earthlings. What is he talking about? Two beings never saw on earth, different breasts. They are not ghosts. They took him. These two beings obviously know the language of him. They must have studied the society, because they say, don't be afraid, human being. If it would have been an almighty God, he would have known the name of it. He would have, don't be afraid, Abraham or whatever. So they say, don't be afraid, human being. All we have the order to bring you up to the highest. The highest wishes to see a human being. So the boy is afraid. They just take him away. And he says, they brought me near to the flames. Then we went up. Rising up, it looked to me as if with many winds. I saw up there a bright shining light. And when we came closer to it, I saw different beings bigger than myself, and they were talking in a language which I could not understand. They bring him up to the flames. They go up, they rise somewhere up there. He sees something like a shining light. He cannot explain what it is. They come closer to it. He sees different beings. They speak in a language which he cannot understand. Of course, it's their own language, and he cannot understand what they are talking. While he's up there, he finally states, "But I wish to fall downwards to the earth. The heavy place, the heavenly place on which we stood, once turned up, and then he turned down. Of a sudden, I saw the earth up, and then I saw the sky and the stars down." Whenever you are in a spaceship, in an orbit about the earth, in a mother spaceship, this spaceship would move around its own axis. By moving on its axis, you receive inside centrifugal force. And centrifugal force works like an artificial gravity. I mean, you are not weightless in there. You always have ground on your feet. But thousands of years ago, nobody could have known it, except he was an eyewitness. And what does he explain? "I wish to fall down on earth. The high place where we were turned itself up and down and up and down. Once I saw the earth up and the stars down." We have, in my 25 books, transferred or translated many of the old holy texts with modern eyes, with the modern brain. And in every case, it makes sense. I mean, we have a yesterday sense, which is the sense out of religion. Du mach langsam Licht. Out of religion, and today's sense is a modern sense. And to me, it makes more sense than yesterday's sense. Because yesterday's sense was a question of believe it or don't believe it. I am still a deep believer in God. I never lost my God. I'm one of these beings who prays every day. The spirit of the universe, which we cannot explain, the spirit of creation, God, is still for me the greatest thing which exists on this universe. But these extraterrestrials who were here some thousands of years ago, they were not gods. We have been misunderstanding them. Now we live in the next millennium. For heaven's sake, should we not start to see at all these things from a different angle? And the modern sense makes sense. It makes more sense than yesterday's sense. And you saw here in a few examples, for example, the Indian tribe of the Hopi. There were these small figures. Why have they done it? So that you do not forget, that the future generations shall not forget the return of the gods. Or we had this Kayapo Indians. Kayapo was the one with the straw dances, the straw garment. Why are they doing this Indian tribe? That the future generation should not forget the return of the gods. We are educated in our modern religion. I am educated as a Christian. Okay, when I was a boy, somebody taught me that at some time in the future, Jesus will return in the clouds. Wonderful. But nobody told me that the Muslim society has the same knowledge. They believe that the Mahdi will return one day. Or I did not learn as a boy that the Jewish community worldwide, they of course believe that their Messiah would return one day. The Jewish community never accepted Christian Jesus to be the Messiah. So, every big religion of today has this expectation that someone will return at some time. But not only the big religions, the small cultures too. Like the Hopis, the Kayapo, the Dogon, they all have it. You remember maybe when Francisco Pizarro, he was the conqueror of the Inca Empire. When he first arrived to Peru, the Incas believed that he was a god who returned. Of course, it was a misunderstanding. Or Hernando Cortes. Hernando Cortes was the one who conquered Mexico, the Aztecs, the Maya. They believe that he is a god. What a rubbish. Christopher Columbus, the same thing. Christopher Columbus wrote in his diary, they looked at us as if we were gods. So the expectation of somebody was already existent at that time. It's not our modern point of looking at it. Small cultures, big religions until today have this expectation that someone will return. Now, if we are honest, not each and every religion can have right. Some of them must be wrong, because they are fighting against each other in their belief. Some of them must be wrong. I believe they are all wrong. Not their God will return. Extraterrestrials will return. They were here in the past. They promised to return in a faraway future. They say, don't be afraid, we will return. And sooner or later, they will return. And as for myself, I think it is more honest to the public, to our community, to discuss these things openly, and not to hide it down and make a secret religion or secret cults out of it. Ladies and gentlemen, you have come here this Sunday morning to listen to a Swiss fellow. And my English, of course, is not perfect. Whenever I have to give an English speech, I should first learn it for 3 days again. But I hope you understood everything. I have to thank to the organizers of this Congress for the invitation they gave to me, especially to Mr. Krogshus. You did a great job, and thank you for the invitation and the job you did. But of course, you all have come here, and you were listening now more than 1.5 hours, very quietly, to this guest from Switzerland. I would love to express my thanks all to you. God bless you.